but I'm excited to be here. As Lisa just noted, my name is Josh Blacksmith. I'm a Senior Director of Global Consumer Relationships and Engagement at Kimberly-Clark. I'm a 150-year-old company, and I've been here for about 3 years after spending roughly the prior 20 or so years working in various digital agencies. I work as part of what's called the Digital Center of Excellence. It's a group of about 20 people. We focus on all the wonderful brands you can see on the screen here, all aligned under a purpose of better care for a better world. And we support every region around the globe. So the 20 of us have to be really choiceful about where we lean in to support advancing digital capability and advancing our ambition in the digital space. So I joined KC a few years ago, as I noted, after spending 20 years working in different digital agencies. Most recently, I was the SVP GM of CRM at FCB in Chicago. I realize that's a lot of acronyms. In my role there, I actually had an opportunity to pitch to Kimberly-Clark in the UK, and the CMO at the time was in the room. This was a 7-hour pitch, and I think a lot of you can relate. That's a pretty grueling amount of time to be pitching. But it gave me a great opportunity to meet the folks in the room, to understand their ambition. And coming out of that pitch, the CMO asked me if I had interest in coming in-house to help build out this capability. So that was how I made the leap away from the world of agencies into Kimberly-Clark. I made this jump in large part because this industry is ripe for disruption. And I believe in the ability to get closer to the consumer and how data, technology, and creativity have really advanced to a place that makes it a really fun time to be in our industry. So I just want to start, it's been so great to meet so many of you over the last couple of days. Imagine for a moment somebody you just met yesterday, perhaps. You probably exchanged introductions. It's nice to meet you. You probably exchanged a little bit about some common interests. Maybe you talked about the ways that your businesses could perhaps do some business together. Now imagine for a moment if that same individual comes up to you after this session and says, "It's nice to meet you. What's your name?" It'd be a little bit awkward, right? A little bit off. Unfortunately, that's the reality of how CPG manufacturers have been treating our consumers for decades. We treat consumers like every time we talk to them, it's the first time we've ever talked to them. We don't pay any attention to preferences they may have shared. We don't pay any attention to the relationship we've started to build. And that's where I knew we have significant opportunity. The other reality, the other unfortunate reality for many manufacturers is that everyone tends to own a direct relationship with our consumers, except for us. All of our publishing partners have a great relationship. All of our retailers have a great relationship. And that was why I came to KC, because, again, it's ripe for disruption. There was an opportunity for us to take better control of our own consumer relationships. And I wanted to join KC to make sure that we were disrupting ourselves before we could become disrupted. So before I take you on the journey that we've been on, I want to sort of root this in, some of the principles for how and what drove our transformation. It's really based off of this book called The Founder's Mentality. So for those of you not familiar, it talks about the fact that there are businesses that when they first launch, they're known as insurgents. They're disruptors. They have the ability to scale and drive business overnight, because they don't have all the complexities of bigger businesses. They don't have all the bureaucratic headwinds sort of facing them every single day. Unfortunately, over time, every business, as it grows, it pushes into this top left quadrant, which is known as an incumbent. This is where you're not necessarily able to launch a product overnight and disrupt yourselves, but you are able to win because of your scale. Once you have a product that is a viable proposition, you can distribute it across your network immediately. That's how incumbents win. Unfortunately, the challenge is when you find yourself as an incumbent, there are only 2 places you can go. Nobody wants to slide down into a struggling bureaucracy, but that's one path. The other path is to push into the top right quadrant, which is known as a scaled insurgent. That's where you still retain the power of your scale, but you also bring back that insurgent muscle, that founder's mentality that gives you the ability to launch new initiatives with agility and autonomy without facing all of those bureaucratic headwinds. So before I get into our journey, I just want to land a couple other points about the process. As you guys can imagine, Allison Lewis is my boss, the Chief Growth Officer. She joined Kimberly-Clark a few months after myself and recognized that she had a massive task ahead of her in terms of recognizing she had pockets of commercial excellence all around the globe, but no real product that allowed her to sort of wrap her arms around it to drive efficient scaling and best practices. So she set up 4 commercial areas of transformation. Those are consumer-inspired innovation, revenue growth management, in-market execution, which is retail and sales, including e-commerce, and then digital disruption, which is the pillar that I lead. With those pillars launched, the first thing I needed to do from a digital perspective was demonstrate to executive leadership why this deserved to be a pillar that required investment and focus. And so one of the first things that I did was build a mission, ambition, and a vision, and I didn't do that alone. One of the key opportunities I had was to work with digital leaders across the globe to build and co-create a shared ambition. That becomes really important in any transformation initiatives to ensure that you're bringing the organization along on the journey with you. So with that mission, ambition, and the vision well-defined, we needed to work with the markets to define our priorities. What are the key things that if we could go unlock these, it could unlock significant value for the organization, and it had to be a scalable proposition. So with executive leadership and the co-creation around key priorities, we then needed a process. We had the autonomy. Now we needed to organize a team. So I was able to handpick between 5 and 10 individuals, cross-functional experts, depending on the scale of the initiative. And I needed more than 50% of their time to operate in true agile. I literally was writing user stories in Jira, operating in 2-week sprints, full sprint ceremonies, having the team organize against a shared vision and defined epics so that at the end of 20 to 30 weeks of this process, we could come away with real artifacts, new processes, new templates, new ways of working that could transform the organization. So with all of that in place, I just want to say that that process is not to be minimized. The amount of work it takes to actually build a process and build a team and getting that foundation laid was critical for enabling us to go on the journey that we knew we needed to go on. One of the most important pieces of this, though, was, again, aligning with executive leadership on the vision. So this is the journey we went on from a digital perspective. I say that you've heard me say, it's a great opportunity to take greater control, greater ownership of the consumer relationship. But the reality is, this actually turns the CPG manufacturer business model on its head. Digital enables that. Historically, CPG manufacturers have driven consumers into retail where we lose all control. The retailers do not care if that consumer buys our products from Kimberly-Clark or buys one of our competitors' products. And worst case scenario, that retailer has its own private label offering that they want consumers to buy because there's better margin. With digital, we have the ability to have and own our own narrative directly with consumers because I don't care what retailer they buy at as long as they buy my products. So that was sort of the vision, owning our relationship, what that could start to unlock for us. I had to land this in sort of a maturity curve to demonstrate the process we were going to go through. Starting with fundamentals, there were a number of things we had to get in order at sort of the crawl stage. The first being, we needed to establish our own focus. I've heard this a lot the last few days, our own zero-party and first-party asset. We established a global goal, a global KPI around the number of records we wanted to collect. And for those of you not familiar with the delineation between zero and first, zero-party data is consumer consent provided, explicitly provided consent data. First party is implicitly collected data off of our website. So we needed a strategy around both of these types of data, and we built this before Google's deprecation of third-party cookie announcement. And so this was a hard thing to do 3 years ago, to get the organization aligned around this. We had to root it in a value exchange. If we are going to start collecting this data, there has to be something in it for the consumer. So we built levers, mutual value exchange levers. These are exclusivity, community, economic incentives, and we wanted to use these as a way to demonstrate that if we could create real value, consumers would willingly provide this information for a better experience. Once we had the data sort of rolling, we realized there were a number of other fundamentals we needed to get in order. We kept our legal department up quite a bit with this new asset coming in because of all the privacy and security regulations. Our cybersecurity team globally, and you guys, we see this every day right now with nearly every state rolling out their own policies. We need to get our own data store in order. We were operating, when I came into the organization, on a system that was no longer supported. It had a 7-day lag on data refresh. It didn't have its own sandbox for mining and modeling. So we actually made a move. I think Ryan's here from Epsilon. We made a move over into Epsilon People Cloud as a solution for us that gave us real-time data refresh, gave us the ability to do mining and modeling. We also needed to get, that's sort of our own data store. We also had to get our pseudonymized data asset in order as well. We needed an identity resolution solution. If you ever want to get to the fly ambition of orchestration, you have to have your own data asset, you have to have your pseudonymized data asset in order. And so this became a solution for us, working with LiveRamp, SafeHaven, GBQ, to create this environment. With those fundamentals in place, and there's still work that we're doing in this on a global scale. These solutions tend to vary market by market depending on sort of what's available. But with that in place, we were able to launch our first transformation initiative. This is where, again, I handpicked 7 individuals for 18 weeks, operating in 2-week sprints. We called it PESO, paid, earned, shared, and owned. In some industries, this is going to seem 101. For a manufacturer, this was breakthrough. The reality is that because we'd lost view of the consumer, we were comfortable just spending in paid media only. We could buy an audience, send them into retail, and then we wait for our mixed model or our MTA to come back to tell us that this worked. We have a positive ROI, let's just keep doing that. The challenge is our brand managers started to chase ROIs off a cliff. The struggle that we have internally with ROIs and MTAs is that when you become overly dependent on those, you lose sight of all the places. They have blind spots. You lose sight of all the places and spaces you could be investing for an even better outcome. So the spirit of PESO was, how do we ensure that we're not just looking at a journey, a mean, and saying we need to be everywhere all the time. We're being choiceful about key moments that we have to win, and bringing every channel to bear in that moment to make sure that we're drowning out the competition. If for Huggies, hospital is that moment we have to win, what's the role of every channel in that moment to make sure that we win hospital? And so, as you can imagine, over the course of this 18 weeks, we uncovered a number of needs, not the least of which was ensuring that we enable our brand managers to operate differently. The briefing process, the ways that we engage an interagency team to make sure that they're coming back to us as one team as opposed to in their individual silos because of the budgets associated individually. We introduced new metrics. ROI wasn't enough. We needed a PESO ROI. ROIs through mixed models tend to be focused on working spend only. We needed an ROI that actually accounted for all of the costs, the variable costs that go into content, creative, and production, so that we could do an apples-to-apples comparison around where we were getting the best result. We also needed to, with this, take a look at sort of the idea of this of a relative impression value. If we're measuring the incremental volume of channels like TV by looking at volume over GRPs or media incremental volume over clicks, how do we measure the effectiveness of our .com? We can see incremental volume through halo effects, but we needed to look at incremental volume over a common denominator. And that became incremental volume over impressions, so a relative impression value. It was a new metric for us that we created so that we could start to do side-by-side comparisons and again, enable our brand managers internally to make more conscious decisions that were balanced in winning these key moments. So we rolled that into one market. This was not about doing this everywhere for everyone around the globe at once. We did this with our baby and child care team in the US to start. Over 18 weeks, we came out of it with a lot of great documentation, new ways of working, and then we scaled this into 30 markets in 2021 globally. So we were able to leverage a lot of the wins, probably an 80-20 rule. 80% was common, the 20% required sort of local market nuance, but we found that that was an effective way for us to roll that. As that began to roll out, you can imagine the amount of new CX training we had to drive. CRM training, .com training. We're operating on 700 different websites globally. How do we bring this into a common framework? We also needed to look at search. Great that we can get an ROI off of our paid search activity, but what if we actually invested in content for our website, and boosted organic search? The reality is that when you do these things together, we have use cases now that prove out there's a multiplier effect. So we had to make sure that we were driving this training in concert. The other thing that we had to do was break down what I call mythical silos. The consumer doesn't see us as a siloed organization. We have silos all over the place, just like any organization. We had to break down the walls between consumer care. If a consumer complains, maybe we shouldn't promote that product to them that day. If we have a consumer that we can't recognize because we have a silo between sales and marketing, that's a challenge. How do we manage sufficiently, effectively across these channels? This is one area that we have a ton of work still to do, and I've heard this come up time and again. How do we better connect retail, sales, and marketing? And that's actually teed up as a 2023 initiative for us to go deeper into that. But with a lot of the change management, some of the tough ways of working beginning to sort of roll out within the org, we started to realize some value through our next big initiative, which we called Consumer-Centric Lifetime Value. This, at the highest level, was about recognizing that there are data signals now that we have access to that we did not even 5 years ago. How do we actually organize teams to not only identify signals, but to prioritize them effectively, to activate off of those, get things into market, and if it wins, automate it? So this was about organizing a team around performance data signals. It was also about ensuring that we view it as one consumer working across all of our brands. So when you start to operate with consumer centricity, you move beyond just the low bar of risk and regulatory compliance, and you move into a space of what we call privacy by design, where we want to build trust and transparency with consumers. We created a preference center so that they can see what we're collecting and how we're using it, and give them the opportunity to directly opt in, out, and down across all of our brands. We also used this transformation initiative to look at key moments that we needed to win that had a shared moment of receptivity, moving. Kleenex, Cottonelle, Viva, these brands all going after the exact same consumer in their own silos, competing for attention, trying to drive sales for individual brands. When we said, what if the contextual relevance is what's most important here? What if all of you brands, you don't worry about which brand takes the lead, but you just make sure that you show up on Pinterest where consumers are pinning boards that indicate moving is about to happen, and it drove significant impact for us. A great return on add to cart with the test that we ran with Walmart. But this is one of those where we wanted, again, the goal here was not to prove out every single use case possible. We picked about 10 very distinct ways of leveraging data signals differently, upper funnel and lower funnel, and used those tests to just inspire brand managers to start to operate differently. And the last point here was around social, upper funnel social signals, but there's also, again, probably the biggest thing that I'm seeing right now for us in the industry is, again, this access to transactional time series, transactional-based data sets. We have a partnership where we bring into Epsilon, receipt-level data where we can see consumers are buying our competitors' products. We can see what retailer they're buying at. So that gave us the ability to bring in recency, frequency, and monetary value models, things traditionally you would have only thought that retailers could do. We were able to run promotion sensitivity models. Why are we treating our promotions one size fits all? Shouldn't we be more choiceful about maybe some consumers don't need a discount at all? Should we extend that reach with those dollars to drive greater effectiveness? We were able to do market basket analysis work to look for if a consumer has allergy medication in a basket, isn't that a great opportunity for Kleenex to get in front of that consumer? And so all of this to say, ultimately, if I get asked today, why do we want to own a relationship with our consumers? Why are we collecting zero and first-party data? It's because we want to optimize one-to-one LTV. That's a story that resonates with our board. That's a story that resonates with our CEO to the point that I'm actually talking to him and the board next week about this journey that we're on and how we continue to invest significantly behind this. So now, before I get into some key lessons, that I've taken away from this journey, I just want to share a quick video that hopefully kind of brings it all together. It's sort of the culmination of all the work over the last 3 years to help demonstrate some of the quick wins we had to put on the board to demonstrate some of the success.
Presents Creating Consumer-Centric Lifetime Value. CPG manufacturers have historically been very consumer data poor. This drove an over-reliance on third-party data and often resulted in impersonal, not-so-targeted marketing. Now, a universe of consumer-level data is at our fingertips, and Kimberly-Clark is grasping it. We saw an opportunity to identify precise data signals and use them to inform communications with buyers. Leveraging that data helps make meaningful connections with consumers that drive higher conversion for the business. Now we're driving growth in new proprietary ways. We built an enhanced single view of consumers across all brands by leveraging data science and automation to realize personalization at scale. We then created a dedicated agile team and process to prioritize and activate data signal opportunities. Our initiative revealed opportunities to connect with more consumers at critical moments. For example, in a breakthrough social signal test, Huggies engaged with newly expecting moms to authentically celebrate their moment with them. This drove 100% positive sentiment and unprecedented reach without spending $1 of working media. We also developed models to analyze the purchasing behaviors of individual consumers. By forecasting future behavior, our pilots lifted incremental sales by as much as 38%. And we built a promotion sensitivity model that helped drive purchases with personalized discount levels, protecting margins and allowing us to make every dollar work harder. Our transformation initiative has accelerated our capabilities. In just 28 weeks, we turned data into competitive advantage to drive impactful consumer connections and immediate business growth. It's a seismic shift in our approach to digital marketing, driving growth by enabling an enhanced consumer experience. This is data-driven consumer centricity at its best.
So you can tell I had to use a British voice to make sure that it sounded a lot more intelligent than I would have sounded in this. But yeah, I built this as a way to, in a very pithy way, help demonstrate to our executive leadership team how this work that we're doing is actually driving real change for us. So now just a few key lessons learned. It's funny because when I was putting this together, I literally had probably 20, and so I tried to sort of bring them down to the top 5. The first is when you start on this ambition, on this sort of journey, you have to start with the end state in mind. And the challenge with not doing that is that even if the initiatives that you want to launch are rooted in purpose, they're rooted in a real business outcome, they can quickly be perceived as random acts of digital. None of us want that. So just by rooting this in what that desired end state is, it helps you always have that as an anchor point to demonstrate to executive leadership the why behind sort of this ambition and why behind some of the activities that you're driving. The second is, you've heard me say, executive sponsorship is everything. Getting executive sponsors to not only say, yes, you can do this, but to also become vocal advocates for you in their markets or, depending on sort of the scale of it with their teams, is everything because it allows you to operate with autonomy. It allows you the ability to feel okay to fail in the journey, to fail in the process. And co-creation is so important. This is one of the biggest ways something can become derailed, is if you get halfway down a transformation initiative and then get sideswiped by another team that feels like they should have been involved at every step of the process. So by being thoughtful about key stakeholders that you need to have involved in that process, you can help ensure that you can drive progress efficiently. The third one here is about being realistic about what can be achieved. Don't try to bite off more than you can chew, and firm on resource requirements. So this second big transformation initiative was a 28-week initiative. I didn't go into it with an ambition to solve everybody's problems. I went into it with an ambition to say, let's do 10 tests, each of them unique, each to inspire a new way of working. If they don't work, it doesn't matter. But resource requirements are so important because if you go to a team or you go to a market and they're not meeting you with the same operational rigor, all of that work you're doing to try to land a transformative way of working is going to fall apart the second you walk away. So you have to be met with operational rigor, time, people, money, to make sure that you can ensure that this is something that can continue into perpetuity. The fourth is that you have to create accountability and a product mindset through Agile. And this is really about, through a product mindset, you're always iterating, you're always improving, you're always building off of an MVP. If something doesn't work, it doesn't matter, who cares, kill it and move on. But it's tough sometimes to get into that mindset, and that's why organizing through product and Agile gives you that flexibility to demonstrate that this is an iterative process. It's part of what we're expecting. You can't always win. You have to fail in order to move forward and make progress. You can learn from the failures so that you don't repeat them, but you need to have the freedom to fail. And the last one here is to not get discouraged. This is an incredibly emotional journey. I'll tell you, like, I had moments, like multiple times, where in 15 minutes, I would go from feeling like I was going to solve the world's problems, literally, to feeling like I was going to solve nobody's problems, to realizing, okay, I'm going to solve a problem, and that's good enough, right? So the key is make sure that you surround yourselves with like-minded individuals who share in the passion, the ambition, know that there will be naysayers that try to throw up roadblocks at every step. But if you stay true to the focus and the vision, and you surround yourselves with that kind of a support system, you'll end up with a good outcome. Again, there are a lot more here. If anybody would like to go deeper into some of the learnings here, if you're on your own transformation journey, I'm happy to go deeper. This is my contact information. But
Thank you.
Just one last point. I'll just say, where do you start? You start with the consumer. I'm going to bring it like full circle. If you're focused on what the consumer expects of brands in your categories, you will uncover opportunities where consumers have certain expectations about what should brands in our category be doing, how are we meeting those expectations, are there opportunities against our competitors where we're either leading or we're behind, or there are white spaces where we could have a first mover advantage. So by bringing that consumer-centric focus and being consumer-obsessed, you can start to leverage data, technology, and creative to truly unlock meaning for consumers in those moments. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone have a question for Josh? Raise your hand. Well, I, of course, have one. I guess, because you talked a little bit about, getting this data and obviously connecting more with your consumers, as well as obviously getting their information. But ultimately, are you able to connect it back to conversions, or is even that your KPI? You know, like, because you mentioned one KPI and then how that evolves, and you have so many different brands within your corporation. So how do you then find, I'm sure that has to come into play at some point. Are you able to connect it?
Yes, it depends on the activation. But there's kind of two worlds. There's one world which is capturing demand, which is like where it's easier to measure. There's also creating demand, which is measured differently. What are you doing to sort of create that demand up front? And a lot of times we kind of get wrapped up in creating demand and trying to tie it to a lower funnel KPI, which doesn't always work. So there has to be a recognition of the fact that there are different KPIs to measure different sort of business outcomes. But the beauty of having access to time series transactional data is you start to get to a place where you can create closed loop attribution. And so by having that data asset, we're turning our owned asset into not just like buying a data asset for one campaign, we're turning it into a multi-purpose asset, something that we can ingest data. We're now sort of back to the owned versus pseudonymized. Through our identity solution, we're ingesting data from Nielsen off a new data schema that we're defining that's going to be something we're always going to be using to help measure the impact of what we're doing, but also to build new audiences for broader reach. And I think what we're excited about is taking these principled ways of working in those two sorts of situations into the walled garden environments as well. So much opportunity sort of sitting ahead of us there as we think about all the clean room solutions that exist today. So.
Great. Well, thank you. And again, everyone, Josh, thank you again.